Hey gamers, what's going on? Welcome back to the best ASMR channel on YouTube. Hopefully I sound a little more awake this time, because I definitely feel like it. And today I have a story to tell. I played Ocarina of Time through the Wii U's Virtual Console, but because the Wii U was one of humanity's biggest mistakes, I had to do some repairs to the gamepad before I could play. The left stick had been getting stuck when pressed upward, making precise movement essentially impossible. So I bought some replacement sticks and started taking apart my gamepad. I would have recorded some footage of this repair, but I'm sure about half of all Wii U owners have already had to do something like this themselves. By the time I finished the repair, I was in an exceptionally sour mood. Not because I had to take apart the gamepad, I had actually already done that before, but because of the lack of controller customization options offered by the N64 Virtual Console. I can see why you can't use the Wii controller with N64 games, just thinking about that makes me want to cry, but there's no reason I shouldn't be able to configure my GameCube controller. But no. You'll use the controller that Nintendo wants, damn it. And that's really one of my main problems with the Wii U. Though I love so many of the games on it, and it was the console that introduced me to a lot of classic titles, much of its design is just annoying and non-user friendly. Ocarina of Time is the Wii U of the Zelda series. So much of the core content is incredible, yet the entire experience is brought down by annoying design choices, and when enough of those little annoyances add up, well, maybe I'll buy a Dreamcast or something next time. The music, the story, the spectacle, these are all steps up from the previous games, but Ocarina of Time doesn't quite stick the landing on the moment-to-moment gameplay. There's nothing so bad that it ruins the experience, but it feels like the entire game is trying its best to waste your time. There are the particularly infamous examples like the King Zora cutscene or having to open the menu about 1 billion times in the Water Temple, but there are also subtler yet much worse examples like the sheer size of Hyrule Field, which greatly inflates the travel time between objectives while housing very little actual content. The game has excessive amounts of downtime, whether that be from the unbearably slow text speed or the extended periods of enemy invulnerability in combat. If I wanted to sit around and be bored, I wouldn't be on the couch, I'd be on the lake. But that's not to say the gameplay is all bad, far from it in fact. Ocarina of Time did a great job of adapting the gameplay of previous games into a 3D space. The switch to 3D brought an issue with perspective. In previous games, players could enter a room and immediately understand, oh, I'm going to die. In Ocarina of Time, the player's field of view had to be limited. This would have been a limitation had the developers kept the same dungeon design from the 2D games, where the majority of the challenge came from the onslaught of enemies, but they instead completely shifted how dungeons were played, to compensate for the new limited perspective. 3D Zelda dungeons focus much more on puzzle solving rather than combat. I personally prefer the dungeon style of the 2D games, but for what Ocarina of Time sets out to do, it does very well. The puzzles, particularly in the adult dungeons, are difficult enough to be engaging, but not so difficult that they're frustrating. These dungeons may be a little too slow for my liking, but I can still appreciate how well designed they are. I also want to commend Ocarina of Time on its approach to side content. There are a lot more side quests or secret areas that lead to actually interesting rewards. There are 2 long trading sequences, and they both lead to optional, yet useful rewards. The Happy Mask Shop's trading sequence eventually gives you access to the Mask of Truth, which you can use to talk to statues around Hyrule and learn about secrets you may not have found yet. The reward isn't that useful, but the process of getting it isn't too taxing either. The longer and more engaging trading sequence eventually gives you access to the Bigoron sword. Yes, I know it's a combination of the words big and Goron, but Big Goron sword sounds really stupid. The Bigoron sword is the best weapon in the game, making the long and somewhat tedious trading sequence more than worth it. That being said, it's also not broken, as its superior damage output is balanced out by the fact that you can't shield with it drawn. The game is still playable and still very fun without it. I never got it on my initial playthrough, but I still had a great time. Yet it is a nice reward for those who go out of their way to complete the side quest. Instead of just throwing a piece of heart at the end of this exhausting side quest, the developers put an actual proper reward, and it's incredibly satisfying because, yeah, I earned that sword. And a lot of the side content in this game feels like that, and it's gratifying. Except for the Gold Skulltulas. That entire side quest brings nothing but frustration. Beyond mostly successfully adapting the Zelda style into 3D, Ocarina of Time should also be praised for its story. I'm not going to pretend that the story is life-changing or anything, especially when compared to the games that came after it, but it is a huge step up from the games that came before it. I'm not necessarily talking about the time travel and all that, but for the record, I love time travel plots, so I did like the overarching story a lot. But what really makes this story so much more memorable is the fact that Zelda, Ganon, and the sages all feel like actual characters instead of just cardboard cutouts. Ganon is far more intimidating in this game because he's actually on screen and given dialogue before the final battle. It's a little questionable whether I should say that Zelda's character is actually an improvement, because Zelda is still really simple and boring, but Sheik is really cool. For those who don't know, Zelda disguises herself as a Sheikah in order to avoid detection after Ganon takes power. Sheik is awesome. You never know when she's going to show up or what she's going to do or what kind of dark magic she's going to pull out of her ass this time in order to get away. But as soon as Sheik transforms back into Zelda, all of that character is gone. She turns from a cool, mysterious ninja to a damsel in distress, from a character to a plot device, and it's really a waste. Some series really struggle with the transition to 3D. I mean, I think we can all agree that LEGO Star Wars for the SNES was the peak of the series, but it's truly a pleasure to see that Zelda had no problem finding its footing, even on the first attempt. Ocarina of Time may not be perfect, and it may kind of annoy me sometimes, but I still think of it positively and consider it one of the better games in the series. If you haven't played it and are at all interested, I highly recommend trying it out. I don't think... My controller broke again.